You are listening.
You're listening.
You are listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
To a TVO Today.
To a TVO Today.
TVO Today
podcast.
A listener note. The following podcast contains sexual language, descriptions of violence, and sensitive themes which may not be suitable for younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Previously on The Oath.
You're either sick or sinful. Those were the messages absorbed by generations of people. And that's what led to these clinical forms of conversion therapy and then these religious or spiritual forms of conversion therapy that you could be fixed.
So any messages or pressures to suppress, deny, and change your identity, whether it's sexual or gender or both, or expression, is considered a conversion practice.
I guess the question is, how long should practitioners have known this is not a credible theory?
If somebody doing conversion therapy in 2002, they would not have been able to find good evidence-based publications on its efficacy.
So in relation to conversion therapy, just because it became banned in 2015, doesn't absolve you from using it prior to that?
No.
If you have ever watched Law and Order, you know when they get to the court scene, the prosecutor strategically unveils their case. That's sort of like what happened at Dr. Melvyn Iscove's hearing. The lawyer representing the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, the CPSO, peppered him with questions about Dr. Edmund Bergler and homosexuality. At one point, Dr. Iscove was asked if he told one of the complainants that homosexuality could be cured. Iscove answered, quote, "Yes, I would have told him that there was a chance for changing this condition if he wanted to try." But even if members of the discipline committee thought that was wrong, they couldn't have done anything about it. You see, the college is the one that decides what the allegations should be. And it had already determined the case wasn't about a standard of practice violation. Meaning, it wasn't saying the doctor failed to comply with current guidelines. That's the part that puzzles us. Because by its own standards, the medical regulator makes a commitment to ensuring that physicians adhere to evidence-based care. And it seems like the college was aware of Iscove's clinical practices during its investigation. We believe that because producer Brendan Leffler tracked down a former CPSO investigator named Paul Lobzinger.
You were involved with the Melvyn Iscove case. You were an investigator on that case.
I was involved with Dr. Iscove, yes.
Lobzinger is a retired cop. He says he worked for the college for about 5.5 years. It's been a really long time since he looked into the complaints against Iscove. Turns out, what he learned still sticks out in his mind.
Iscove was an adherent of a psychoanalyst from like the 50s named Bergler. Do you remember anything about that?
I remember that he was a guy who followed a guy named Bergler's methods or beliefs when it came to the way he treated certain patients. As just a normal person, I thought Bergler was a nut. I thought he was crazy. I thought it was total craziness.
Did it strike you as strange that that was coming up in the mid-2010s when you were investigating this?
The fact there's still people who believe that, it's not strange, it's crazy. It really is.
So in today's episode, we're going to focus on the CPSO, its record of transparency, and how it deals with complaints. Because the college never really drew a clear line in the sand on how Iscove used Bergler's methods in his practice, especially when it came to certain sexual orientations. And it isn't saying why. For TVO Today, this is The Oath. I'm Krisha Collier. This is episode 5, The College. For months, we have been going over all the Iscove documents again, looking for anything we may have missed. One exhibit that stood out to us was an application for funding. That's meant to cover therapy for patients who allege they have been sexually abused by a doctor. It's part of the CPSO process. What got our attention was a date. It says the person reported the sexual abuse to someone at the college in 2014. That's about a year and a half before the CPSO's notice of hearing, where all the allegations were spelled out. Most of the information on the document is redacted. But there is some handwriting, so I asked patient X if it looked familiar. For accuracy, I wanted to see if this was you. It's basically all redacted, but does that look like your writing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That must be around the time that I reported it to the college.
It's been a while since we heard from patient X, so let me reintroduce you. He was a patient of Iscove's for about 2 decades. He is one of the men who came forward with accusations of sexual abuse.
I didn't actually make that decision to come forward right away. I was still quite hesitant because I didn't want to go on the record. I didn't want to uncover and unbury all of the skeletons.
For years after patient X stopped therapy with Iscove, he says he kept the alleged abuse to himself. Then, according to the discipline committee's decision, he told a new psychiatrist he was seeing. This psychiatrist, by law, had to report it to the CPSO, which caused patient X a lot of distress.
I would only be willing to talk to the college if there were other complaints. And in fact, there was another complainant, and I said, yeah, now that I know there's a second person, I would feel badly if this were an ongoing thing with other patients.
What was the process like for you?
Uncomfortable. Wasn't something I really wanted to do. I was very adamant about not speaking about it for a long time. I was embarrassed and ashamed, and I was fearful that certain people would find out and judge me or think I was an idiot for not seeing through it or protecting myself or whatever, reporting him earlier. I went into the college and had an interview with the investigator, and they documented everything I'm basically telling you.
The investigator he spoke to was Lobsinger. It's confirmed on the form I'm holding. Brennan met him at a busy coffee shop about an hour and a half south of Toronto. That's the lunchtime rush you can hear in the background. So the next bit of tape is going to be a little bit noisy.
So how many complaints did you investigate?
I couldn't tell you.
You're talking about hundreds, thousands?
In the hundreds.
Okay.
Lobsinger has a friendly, easygoing manner. He worked for the Toronto Police Service for almost 31 years. He was part of different specialty units, including the Sexual Assault Squad. After retiring in 2011, Lobsinger says he was immediately snapped up by the CPSO.
So when you get a complaint and you start investigating, can you take me through how that works?
In many cases, the process was different than policing in that you would notify the physician that you had a complaint, that it involves this patient, that it involves records. You'd get a response back either from the physician or from the physician through counsel, through a lawyer.
The college gets a lot of complaints. From 2020 through 2024, it received an average of 3,866 new ones a year. Many are relatively minor, but some can be much more serious, like what the CPSO calls sexual impropriety or boundary violations. This is where experienced investigators like Lobsinger are really important.
When you finish your investigation, what happens then?
Our report does not make any recommendation. Our report is simply, this is what we found, this is who we talked to, this is what we gathered, and they make that decision.
They refers to the CPSO. See, the college has a committee called the Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee that decides what allegations to make. Brennan asked Lobsinger about the Iscove case, and he wasn't willing to talk specifically about the evidence he gathered. But when asked if he spoke with Iscove and his accusers, Lobsinger confirmed he did. I have to tell you, there's a big difference between the candid conversation we had with Lobsinger and what we got from the CPSO. It's like night and day. When I started looking into Iscove's history, I contacted the college. I asked if there had been any other complaints against him. The media department responded, quote, "Due to confidentiality restrictions outlined in Section 36 of the Regulated Health Professions Act, 1991, we cannot disclose any further information." So I simplified my request and asked for just numbers. The response was essentially the same.
I believe the wording of that regulation is vague, and I do believe that they could release information, for example, about the number of complaints a doctor has had.
Malpractice lawyer Paul Hart says, from his perspective, the CPSO has a tendency to leave questions unanswered. He says the medical regulator often claims it can't release certain information, but he believes it does have some discretion.
The reality is no one's gone to court to really flesh out what that legislation permits. And a college acting in the public interest, in my view, would be going to court and attempting to release more information, not less.
We decided to try again. This time, Brennan emailed the college. One of the things he asked for was annual statistics of sexual abuse complaints going back to 1980. Right now, the CPSO publishes complaint data in its annual report. The last 10 years are on its website. So we both thought there wouldn't be an issue. We were wrong.
Hello.
Hey.
Did they cite confidentiality?
No, so I'll just read it to you.
Yeah.
So she says, "Hello, Brennan. Thank you for your patience. CPSO's archive of annual reports is limited to what is available on our website in accordance with our data retention policy, which is 10 years.
That sounds like they are wiping things after 10, well, everything after 10 years. Because if you're saying data, that's a pretty broad term.
Surely they didn't create a data retention policy to destroy every single piece of paper in their archives prior to 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think we just need to know more.
Yeah.
Because at face value, it's too broad and it's all encompassing, and it may or may not be their true intention of what they're saying.
We hoped it was a misunderstanding, so we asked for clarification. The answer? There are different data retention schedules for different kinds of documents. What are those different data retention schedules? The answer? You guessed it, that's confidential.
You have questions that do not have answers and that are never going to be answered in our current system. There needs to be an overhaul. This is not a tweakable situation.
Over the years, the college has been criticized about how it has handled sexual abuse complaints. There have been 3 task forces about that issue. The first in 1991 was commissioned by the CPSO to review its own practices. The other 2 were initiated by government. They focused on sexual abuse in all health professions. The CPSO was mentioned in those too. Dr. Gail Robinson, remember her from episode 1? Well, she has been heavily involved in efforts to reform the system for what feels like forever. She was even a key advisor on the first task force, which traveled around speaking to patients.
The patients were either unwilling to come forward, thinking that nobody would listen to them, or if they did come forward, generally the college would ask the doctor if he or she had abused the patient. The doctor would say no, and so they'd dismiss the complaint.
Since then, there have been some improvements. For example, in 1993, the province updated the rules. One big change was a zero-tolerance approach to sexual abuse. Any doctor caught doing it would automatically lose their license. It was a major victory.
It was brilliant. And they were really sticking to that idea that if you erred, you lost your license, and you had to really prove why you should get it back.
But high-profile cases have continued to pop up. Just look at the story of Dr. Brian Thicke. Global News covered the case in 2019.
Longtime Brampton Dr. Brian Thicke leads a disciplinary hearing after pleading no contest to misconduct charges.
It started with one patient. She filed a complaint in 2015, accusing Dr. Thicke of groping her during an unnecessary breast exam. The CPSO originally decided it didn't merit a hearing. The college didn't release its reasons to the public because it says the law doesn't allow it to. But after the complaint was dismissed, the woman who made it turned to Ontario's Health Professions Appeal and Review Board. The review board found the CPSO's investigation was adequate. But it said based on the evidence, the decision to take no action was, quote, unreasonable. and ordered the college to reconsider. The review board released its findings to the public. And that's how it came out that the CPSO was aware of at least one other complaint against Thicke, stemming from an incident in 1994. It was also dismissed. Eventually, Thicke was accused by 15 women of things like conducting breast exams without warning or consent. The complainant who started it all spoke to Global.
I came forward and so many other people came forward, and the college didn't hear us.
Ultimately, the CPSO did order a hearing. In October of 2019, Thicke pleaded no contest to 2 of the 4 allegations against him. By that point, the 90-year-old doctor's medical license had already expired. He agreed not to apply to get it back. We reached out to the CPSO about Dr. Thicke. In an email, a spokesperson said the CPSO takes its responsibility to protect patients and allegations of professional misconduct, including sexual abuse, extremely seriously. The college said it is committed to continuous improvement, and it has implemented a series of reforms over the years to how it responds to complaints.
Who is ensuring that the CPSO is accountable to the public and transparent?
That's a good question. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a retired policeman and an investigator. You should be able to get an answer to those questions, if it exists. That should all be available. Someone has that information.
And that's what brings us back to the start of this episode, the Iscove case. We wanted to ask the CPSO why it didn't include an allegation related to Iscove's clinical practices on certain sexual orientations. But it declined our request for an interview. A media rep did get back to us, indicating that physicians are expected to comply with professional guidelines, including CPSO's human rights in the provision of health services policy. It calls for doctors to create a safe environment where, quote, the rights, autonomy, dignity, and diversity of all people are respected. The statement added, physicians are supposed to follow legal requirements under the Human Rights Code, as well as provincial and federal laws. If they don't, the doctor may be subject to disciplinary action under the Professional Misconduct Regulation of the Medicine Act of 1991. The college suggested it would file conversion therapy under, quote, failing to maintain the standard of practice of the profession. Whatever you call it, Iscove wasn't accused of it. And once again, the CPSO didn't explain why, citing confidentiality.
Any kind of therapy which says that it's trying to change your sexual orientation as opposed to make you comfortable with your sexual orientation is a form of conversion therapy. Anybody who was up to date on what was going on in psychiatry should definitely know that.
And the college definitely knew the rules had changed. At the time of the provincial ban, the CPSO released an article saying the organization was committed to ensuring that patients receive evidence-based care. It went on to point out that, quote, any service that treats particular sexual orientations or gender identities as pathologies to be cured is outside the bounds of acceptable professional practice. But for some reason, it didn't appear to think Iscove crossed that boundary.
The province was noting that this was not seen as a curable disorder, but somehow the college didn't want to say that. I mean, come on.
Seems like that was a missed opportunity to stomp on that practice.
I think that was really avoiding a important issue and not being willing to just come right out and say, no, that's silly.
In our many back and forths with the CPSO, it did refer us to the Ontario Physicians and Surgeons Discipline Tribunal for a number of our questions. A reminder, that's what the discipline committee is called now. Like the college, when we asked for an on-the-record interview, it turned down our request and sent us an email response instead. But after our first episode aired, the tribunal spokesperson quickly reached out to explain why it took almost 7 months to send us the Iscove exhibits. They said the delay was primarily because confidential patient information had to be redacted. The parties involved were also given a chance to review the documents before they were sent to us. As we learned, that included Iscove. They told us that the rules were changed in 2023 so that documents could be provided upon request, and that files from after 2023 are now usually sent within 1 business day. After all that, we still didn't have a clear answer about what was being done to prevent doctors from engaging in so-called conversion therapy. So we took one last shot and reached out to Ontario's Minister of Health. But the minister declined our interview request too. And instead, a PR person sent us a statement outlining the laws that apply to the CPSO, and adding Ontario has comprehensive rules regarding how health regulatory colleges must handle complaints involving patient abuse, including sexual abuse. But they didn't respond to our question about conversion therapy. So just in case you aren't counting like we are, all 3 organizations refused to do an interview. And that's what gets me thinking about patient X again. Coming forward is difficult, and he only did it when he knew he wasn't alone. So we wondered if there might be others who had filed complaints against Iscove. As it happens, there was at least one other allegation. And it was serious enough for the college to post a notice of hearing. Iscove was accused of improper conduct in a men's public washroom in about January 2014. We confirmed it with Lobsinger.
Yes, I remember an incident hearing that, yes.
Do you know what happened to that hearing or that complaint?
I left in September of 16. I don't know.
You won't find it anywhere on the college's website now. But as they say, the internet is forever. We found an archived copy of Iscove's CPSO profile that mentioned the incident. So far, that's all we can find. Neither the regulator nor the tribunal will tell us much about this, other than the notice was withdrawn and the hearing was called off. Iscove denies any insinuation of wrongdoing here. We will get into this more in the final episode.
You've got this public hearing announcement, and then you can't figure out whatever happened.
And the college should be able to answer that. If it's listed as a hearing, what happened to it?
To be fair, there are lots of cases where the patient has seen some sort of justice. Patient X feels like he did. He was very complimentary of the college. He said the people he dealt with were very sympathetic.
They kept me in the loop as to what was going on, and they allotted a certain amount of funds for me to go for further therapy to help me deal with, whatever I was experiencing as a result of coming forward. From my perspective, they were good and professional and supportive.
I'm not surprised by this. Even some skeptics admit the regulator has made progress. But when it comes to transparency, the college is rather opaque. Most of what we want to know is under lock and key at the CPSO. We couldn't get access to that information, so it was up to us to try and find another way. And there's really only one person left on our list to ask, and that's Melvyn Iscove himself.
That's interesting. His name is still on...
So Iscove's name is still on the... directory. That is interesting.
That's next time on The Oath. The Oath is hosted, written, and co-produced by me, Krisha Collier. Brennan Leffler is a co-producer and writer. Sound design and editing by Damien Kearns. Editing and technical support by Matthew O'Mara. Theme music by Allison Layton Brown. Special thanks to the Barry and Lori Green Family Charitable Trust who made this podcast possible. For TVO, Katie O'Connor is the managing editor of podcasts and digital video. Lori Few is the executive producer of digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content. Thank you for listening.